Now that we know how American settlers were able to get the land from Native Americans in the Great Plains area, what we'll look at today is what did they do with that land once they got there? This region was wide open space with no boundaries to man or cattle. It also had very low population, which is going to make it a prime area for farming and cattle ranching. There were much greater urban populations on the east coast of our country. These much greater populations are going to demand more food. However, because of the very close quarters, it's going to be very difficult to raise the food that they needed. So, what happened was that they're going to raise cattle and have farms in the west. That all of that harvest, both the cattle and the harvest from the crops, are going to have to be shipped back to the east coast where the majority of the population was. This is going to set up the cattle drive. The cattle were then driven to meet the railroads. They did not drive cattle like you see here in this top photo or in the bottom photo. They didn't drive them all the way to the East Coast. If you had a cattle on foot all the way to the East Coast, you would have a skinny cow that would not make for very much beef. So instead, they drove the cattle to the railroads, loaded them on the railroads, and then shipped them to the East Coast that way. These are just a few of the more popular cattle drive trails: Chisholm Trail, Abilene. When you think of the cowboy, you think there's nothing more American than a cowboy out there with his cattle, who's living this grand life, which we'll talk about in a minute. However, Americans did not come up with the idea of cowboys. In fact, it were the Mexicans that taught the Americans how to be cowboys. Unfortunately, this whole area and region that was good for cattle population does not last very long. What happened to the cattle? Well, one, there were too many cattle. There just simply wasn't enough food to support that population. And when a disease is presented into a very large population, that disease is going to spread very quickly. When drought hits, it's going to kill off their food supply, which in most cases was grass. That's a big problem. All of this is going to lead to those cattle dying out. One of the biggest inventions that changes the cattle ranching industry was the invention of barbed wire. Barbed wire fences are going to completely block the open range. Now, landowners could put up these barbed wire fences to prevent the cattle from merely walking across their land and eating all of their grass. This particular invention is going to be developed by a guy named Joseph Glidden and is going to be responsible for ending the open range. Now cattle cannot simply freely roam across the plains. This area was also good for miners. Miners were going out west in search of gold. We have talked about the various gold rushes in the past, like in California in 1849 and the Black Hills of the Dakotas as well. Comstock Lode was another major strike, except this one was not gold, it was silver. In Alaska, there were many gold and silver strikes. So we see that these precious metals are going to draw a lot of people to these regions. And just like in California, where it caused the population to skyrocket, we see the same thing all over the West. We see towns pop up very quickly to accommodate all of these new people coming in. But once the gold or silver was gone, the town simply has nothing left to support it and dies out, leaving behind what we call a ghost town. While many people think of the lives of cowboys in this glamorous way and the lives of these miners in a very glamorous way, these are not going to be very easy lives. First of all, there was a very large mix of people. Miners are going to be very diverse because there was no particular skill set. Anybody could try their hand at mining. You had people from all walks of life, all ethnicities, and all races who attempted to mine. There were lots of opportunities. So again, a lot of people are going to try their hand at it. These whole idea of the Wild West with saloons and gambling, like you see here in this picture, these are going to be part of the reality of this area. However, while most people were hoping to strike it rich, most of them fell on very hard luck and barely made enough money to get by. So most of them, no, did not get rich. The whole idea of the Wild West, this legend of adventure, where we have this idea that these big cowboys, Wild Bill Hickok, Calamity Jane, Wyatt Earp, Jesse James, Billy the Kid, all of these stories were of actual people who lived in the West. This picture here is of Jesse James. And while they lived these glamorous lives, the stories that were told about them in dime novels, which were stories of adventure and success, really exaggerated those stories. But because just like a movie today that gets a lot of people to go out and see it, that's what dime novels were of this time period. People would read them just for entertainment and they would pass them along to their friends as well. So, all of these stories and this whole idea of the Wild West, this era that seemed to last for hundreds of years, really didn't at all. In fact, it only lasted about 30 years. But those stories are going to live on in these dime novels that have become so popular.